if you're spending money on it, you sure as better use it. Hey y'all, welcome back to my channel, and today I'm doing this tag that has just been started recently by Allie Glines and Samantha March. And since then, all of my favorite YouTubers have either put out a video for the eyeshadow palette tag, which is what this video is, or are planning to make one. And I figured I love eyeshadow palettes. It's been a hot minute since I talked about eyeshadows on my channel. And even though nobody in that sphere of famous beauty YouTube people really know who I am, I figured that I'd still hop on the trend and do this eyeshadow palette tag for myself. If this is your first time seeing me, I hope you'll consider subscribing before you go. Hopefully I can convince you and draw you in today through my video. I did recently rank my entire eyeshadow palette collection. I'll link that video here, so definitely watch, because if you're watching this video, I'm sure that you wouldn't mind having another eyeshadow palette collection and ranking video to watch. I also have an If I Could Only Keep 10 Palettes video, so I will both link that here and put it in my description. I do have the palettes I'm going to talk about in my little box, so let's get started. Alright, so the first prompt is my newest eyeshadow palette, and these are actually like brand new. They're still in their bags. Okay, so I just took these out of their little bags, and my newest palettes are these three. So my newest palettes are these three e.l.f. bite-sized palettes. I got Cream and Sugar, Truffle, and Rosewater. I decided to finally get my hands on these. Mostly I bought these because on the e.l.f. website from rewards I had $8 off, so I bought these three $3 palettes, so I really got them for $1. I picked these up because, of course, I want to try them. They've been super hyped, and I also wanted to do like a detailed swatch video and whatnot with these, and also give my review a little bit later after I've had some time to play with them. Because I just got these and I haven't really played with them, I don't super consider them a part of my collection yet. And even though these will answer some future prompts, like my smallest eyeshadow palette, for example, I am not going to select these just because I literally just got them, and I think that I would want to pick something that like is more in my collection for the prompts. The second prompt is to show your oldest palette, and I don't even have the actual physical palette of it anymore because I depotted it, and so this palette is going to be the ColourPop I Think I Love You. I have it depotted in my little magnetic palette, and it is these 9 shades here, these really beautiful, stunning neutral shimmer shades. And I also have a couple of these shadows dispersed throughout my other ColourPop palettes to replace some pressed glitters, since I am not a fan of those, so I just popped them out and popped in some other ColourPop shadows that I like better. The ColourPop I Think I Love You palette is definitely a palette for a shimmer lover. It only has 3 mattes or 4 mattes in the entire palette, and the rest are shimmers, but I think it satisfies every bronzy, gold, neutral shimmer need that you have, and it's a huge bummer that it's discontinued by ColourPop. I think it's one of their best palettes. The third prompt is my most expensive palette, and the answer winner for that is my Pat McGrath Mothership Sublime eyeshadow palette. This is a 6-pan eyeshadow palette, and those are the shades inside. I love it. I used this palette on my eyes today, and I mean, I always look good when I use this palette. So when I first bought this palette, the original price was $55. Since then, they've increased the price to $65, but I got this when Sephora still had daily deals, and I got this for half off of $55, so $27.50. But just talking about retail value, this is my most expensive palette. I am so glad that I was able to get this because I'm glad to have this palette. I wanted to try the Pat McGrath formula, even if it's not like their special formula that's only in the $125 palettes. I still really like these shimmers, and this matte is super nice. It actually is the same tone almost exactly as Ginger from the Anastasia Beverly Hills Jackie Aina palette. It's only 6 shades, but I could go a lot of different ways with just these 6 shades because it has a big range of depth. Truly, every time I use this palette, I am amazed and glad I have it. Prompt number 4 is your most affordable palette, and for that I picked my Wet n Wild 10-pan Color Icon palettes. This is in my Glamour Squad and this is in VI Purple. These original price are $4.99, however on Ulta, CVS, wherever, a lot of times you can find these on sale for buy one get one half off, or just on sale in general. I talk about these palettes a lot on my channel. I think the formula is great, especially for the price, but even not for the price. This is a shade for shade dupe of the Anastasia Beverly Hills Soft Glam palette, which I actually have next to me. I'll show you. So here's a Soft Glam and here's a Wet n Wild. So shade for shade dupe. And this other palette in the shade VI Purple has shade dupes for the Natasha Denona Lila palette, Lila. Prompt 5 is my everyday palette, and I just showed y'all, it is my Anastasia Beverly Hills Soft Glam. And this is just because this is, I don't know, this is a definition of everyday palette to me. I really like either neutral, and if not neutral, pink or burgundy, which, I mean, every time I use this palette, I just feel really beautiful, and that's it. Like, I feel beautiful, not just my makeup looks good. You know what I'm saying? I also consider this a good everyday palette because I like the Anastasia Beverly Hills formula for busy mornings because first of all, I know how to work with the formula, but also because they blend so fast, and fast is the name of the game when I'm getting ready in the morning for work. Prompt 6 is my most colorful palette, and that is without question my ColourPop So Jaded palette. Here's the inside of that palette, and it's not completely colorful. It's not like a rainbow palette or anything, but it has such stunning jewel tones, and I love the like ethereal shimmers in this. Like for example, like this fluorite, aquamarine, and just like this diamond shade here, I love. I'm actually using diamond as a little bit of a lid topper on top of the Pat McGrath Mothership Sublime palette, just to give that extra little bit of twinkle to show on camera in the lights. I don't have a ton of colorful eyeshadows, and that's actually because I have this palette. Since I got this palette, I don't really feel a desire to buy any other colorful eyeshadows. I have a little series where I dupe new palettes, like with shade by shade dupes within my own collection, and I do reach into this palette a lot for a ton of those videos. So this is just a very useful palette to me, and it really has everything I want and need. For my smallest palette, I have my Natasha Denona mini palette. So here is the mini nude, and this is the mini glam. I really like the formula of these two palettes. I do think they're very similar in formula. The new mini retro that came out, I wanted so bad because I love pinks, but I actually duped it in my collection and realized that I really don't need it. I feel like when you see like palettes on YouTube, they look bigger than they are in whatever YouTuber's hands, but these are actually quite small. This is like a little over the length of my palm. And for size comparison of each of the pans, like here is the pan compared to the standard ColourPop palette pans. And then also here are the pan sizes compared to the e.l.f. bite-sized palettes. Even though these are only $25 only because it's pretty cheap for what you can find at Sephora, it's still kind of pricey for this size of eyeshadow palette. That being said, if you have the means, I would still recommend these. The formula is very nice. The tones are great for every day, so if you're spending money on it, you sure as better use it. These just never let me down. Prompt 8 is to show your biggest palette, and this is a repeat palette from a previous prompt, but there's nothing in my collection that comes even close to this, so it's the ColourPop So Jaded. I already talked about this, so I'm not going to talk about it anymore. Other than the ColourPop So Jaded, I think that my palettes with the most shades in it are actually my Anastasia Beverly Hills eyeshadow palettes, which have 14 shades. So between 14 and 35, there's just like no comparison. I can't pick another palette. Prompt 9 is my palette with the best memory. And for that, I'm gonna pick my Tartelette in Bloom palette. This was my first ever high-end eyeshadow palette. I actually ordered this on the same day as when I ordered my ColourPop I Think I Love You palette, and those are my first two palettes ever. And I also used my boyfriend's credit card to buy this, so technically it was a gift from my boyfriend, which is something cute to remember when I use this. And this is just like a super functional palette. I will continue to use this forever until I guess the formula goes bad. I don't have a ton of life experiences yet since I'm only 25, so I don't have like a super like important life event where I wore a specific palette, and that's why it's my favorite memory. But this is like a very simple memory, but one that I still treasure. Prompt number 10 is to show a palette worth the hype, and for that I have the Anastasia Beverly Hills Jackie Aina palette. I'm sure anyone watching has seen this palette a ton on YouTube, like within the last year. But the thing about this palette is that you still see people talking about it very regularly, using it all the time. Yeah, I think that this palette is truly worth the hype. If you can get your hands on it, I would recommend doing so, especially now that it's kind of been phased out because it's limited edition. You can find it on sale for really good prices. If something happened to this palette and I didn't have it in my collection, I would really miss it. And I think I would actually go out and actively seek to replace it. My favorite shades, I'll pick 3 favorite shades in this palette. Okay, I'll pick 4 favorite shades in this palette. So I love Sponsored because it's a really strong brown-green duochrome, but when you use it very lightly and sheer it out all over the lid, it reminds me a lot of ColourPop Glass Bowl. It's just a very like translucent, almost lid topper, and I think it makes for a stunning one shadow look, and it doesn't look really strong and intense if you sheer it out. I also love Ginger. It is a little deep for a transition tone, but because these blend so well, you can use it and then build it up along the lash line. I really like Lituation. This is a really cool gray purple taupe, and you wouldn't think that it looks flattering because it's kind of a strange tone or a unique tone, especially on really yellow skin like mine, but it just does. And my other fourth favorite shade is Pinker here, just because I think it's a great pink matte. And this is another one that, similar to Ginger, you can use Pinker as a very light fluffed out transition and then also build it up in the outer corner along the lash line wherever you want to like create depth just with one tone. Okay, prompt 11 is a palette not worth the hype. And I feel like people are gonna like throw hands with me over this, but my pick is the Dose of Colors Desi X Katie Friendcation palette. Now, let me explain. I do want to say, every time I talk about this palette, I have to mention that I adore the mattes. I think the mattes are outstanding in this palette, and I also have the Dose of Colors Marvelous Mauves eyeshadow palette, and those mattes also perform well, so I just really like Dose of Colors mattes. But the thing about this palette that was the most hyped were the shimmers, the metallics. But these shimmers are stunning. They give a really nice effect, but their texture is gritty. Like, they're more of a chunky, gritty, almost glittery kind of texture, which gives a beautiful effect on the eyes, but I don't like that kind of user experience when putting on my eyeshadow. I think it's pretty. I do like it. I don't dislike this palette. If I dislike a palette, I just declutter it and it's not even in my collection, but I think the metallics in here are a little bit hard to control. They are kind of glittery and they have like little flecks of glitter that are scattered, and I feel like I would rather have something smooth and foiled. Prompt number 12 is a favorite palette from a favorite brand. I saw this prompt and thought about just the brands. I was like, oh, well, it has to be ColourPop, Anastasia Beverly Hills, or Juvia's Place. And I also have multiple palettes from these brands as well as some other brands. But thinking about 2 seconds more, I decided that it has to be a ColourPop palette because I was obsessed with ColourPop. I still really do like their shadows, but I got tired of them in 2019, which a lot of people did. But earlier in my channel, I featured ColourPop eyeshadows in a ton of my videos, especially because at the time, ColourPop was maybe like a third or half of my eyeshadow palette collection. It was pretty much the only affordable eyeshadow palette that I used. I have, I think, 7 ColourPop eyeshadow palettes, but among those, my favorite is ColourPop Sweet Talk. This is one that just gives you a beautiful look every time you use it. It makes me feel really young, youthful, pretty, and it has one of these Super Shock shadows in it, which I love when the palettes have one of those because I think that you just always have a go-to lid topper shade to really bring out some dimension in the eye look. I was debating for this category to pick between the Sweet Talk and the ColourPop So Jaded because I obviously love that palette, but when I think about it, just day to day, I really prefer smaller palettes rather than something big and cumbersome, which honestly the ColourPop So Jaded palette is a little bit cumbersome to hold. So in the morning, I also like to kind of have a very clear color scheme, and it kind of decreases decision fatigue throughout the day if I don't really need to spend time picking my eyeshadow look that morning. Oh, this palette did have a couple of pressed glitters, but I replaced them with shimmer eyeshadows from either the ColourPop I Think I Love You palette or the ColourPop Yes Please palette. I also did that with the 2 shimmers in the So Jaded palette. These 2 shades were pressed glitters, but I swapped them out. Okay, prompt number 13. And the final prompt is show my most used eyeshadow palette. Right after I got into makeup, which is around when I first ordered the ColourPop I Think I Love You palette and the Tarte Tartelette in Bloom eyeshadow palette, my eyeshadow palette exploded. So go figure, I had trouble picking a palette for most used because since my palette collection grew so quickly, I feel like one specific palette doesn't have enough use because I make it a point to myself to rotate through every eyeshadow palette I own. So I use like one palette for a week and then move on to the next one. So I'm not hitting pan on anything yet. It's pretty embarrassing. But for this one, I'm gonna answer this in a couple different ways. I'm sorry, this is cheating, but my most used palette like recently has to be the ColourPop Jackie Aina palette because I dip into this sponsored shade so much in the way that I said, which is just kind of lightly, very, very lightly washing it all over my lid, which is also why it maybe doesn't look like there's a huge dent. There is a dent, but not as deep for how much I use it because I use so little of the shadow at one time. However, when I think about like as a whole in my entire collection and all of time, surface level, what has the most use, it is the Tartelette in Bloom eyeshadow palette. So like one shade that has a lot of use is this little bottom shimmer called Funny Girl, and also this matte skin tone shade has the Tarte impression completely worn off. This pink transition shade also has the Tarte impression almost completely worn off. And I do like using these two dark browns to fill in my eyebrows. There we have it. Those are the answers to all 13 of the prompts of the eyeshadow palette tag. I have loved watching these. I anticipate in the next week there are going to be a lot more of these videos coming out, so I'm excited to see all of them. If you're a creator, I recommend that you make one of these too because it's really fun to kind of dig through my collection, and I don't know, I just love touching my eyeshadow palettes. I hope I entertained you for a few minutes of your day today. Remember that y'all are my treasure. Find the beauty in every day, and most importantly, be kind to yourself. I'll see you in my next video. Bye!